Jamal Smith, a man in his early 40s with a calm demeanor and a deep appreciation for nature, had spent countless hours transforming the barren patch of earth in front of his suburban home into a lush, vibrant garden. Rows of blooming flowers, herbs, and vegetables now flourished where once there had been nothing but dry soil. To Jamal, the garden was more than just a hobby. It was an expression of his heritage, a tribute to his grandmother who had taught him the value of nurturing life, and a daily source of peace in a world that often felt rushed and disconnected. Before going deeper into the story, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. One warm Saturday morning, as sunlight filtered through the leaves of a young maple tree, Jamal was kneeling by a bed of lavender when a sharp voice interrupted his quiet moment. Diane Reynolds, a woman in her late 50s with tightly pulled-back silver hair and a reputation for being unyielding, approached briskly down the sidewalk. Her crisp posture and the clipped tone in her voice immediately signaled that this visit was not a friendly one. "Mr. Smith," Diane began, folding her arms with an air of authority, "I'm here on behalf of the HOA board to discuss your front yard garden. It has come to our attention that your garden violates the community's landscaping guidelines." Jamal looked up, wiping dirt from his hands. "Good morning, Diane. I'm surprised to hear that. What specific guidelines are you referring to?" Diane's eyes narrowed slightly. The HOA's covenants clearly state that front yards must maintain a uniform appearance, primarily grass lawns with minimal deviations. Your garden's variety and density don't conform, and residents have lodged complaints. Taken aback, but maintaining his composure, Jamal responded, "I understand the importance of community standards, but this garden means a lot to me. It's not just about aesthetics. It's about connecting to my roots and creating a welcoming environment for pollinators and neighbors alike." Diane's expression hardened. "While I appreciate your personal connection, the rules are the rules. You must remove the garden or face potential fines and further action." Jamal stood slowly, feeling the weight of the confrontation settle over him like a cloud. "I've put a lot of effort into this space, Diane. It's not just dirt and plants. It's a part of who I am. Is there no room for exceptions or dialogue?" Diane shook her head firmly. "The HOA board is unified on this matter. We must uphold the community's standards to preserve property values and neighborhood cohesion. Your garden stands out too much and sets a precedent we cannot allow." A mix of frustration and resolve stirred within Jamal. He had anticipated resistance, but hoped for at least a conversation that acknowledged his perspective. Instead, Diane's rigid stance left little room for compromise. "May I ask," Jamal began carefully, "how these rules were established and whether they consider the diversity of residents' backgrounds and values? My garden reflects traditions that many might find enriching rather than disruptive." Diane's gaze flickered for a moment, perhaps caught off guard by the question. "The guidelines were created years ago with input from residents to maintain a consistent aesthetic. While the community is diverse, the rules apply equally to everyone." Jamal took a deep breath, recognizing that this initial encounter was only the beginning of a larger struggle. "I'd like to request a formal meeting with the board to discuss this further. Perhaps there's a way to find common ground." Diane nodded curtly. "You may submit a request, but I won't promise any leniency. The board takes these matters seriously." As Diane turned to leave, a few neighbors emerged from their homes, watching the exchange with curious expressions. Some smiled encouragingly at Jamal, while others looked uneasy, perhaps fearing the implications of challenging the HOA. Once Diane was out of sight, Jamal returned to his garden, kneeling beside the lavender once more. The scent was soothing, a small comfort amid the uncertainty. He glanced at the vibrant colors and the buzzing bees, feeling a renewed determination. This garden was more than just a patch of earth. It was a statement of identity and resilience. Later that day, Jamal began gathering the HOA's covenants and community guidelines. He pored over the documents, noting the language about landscaping restrictions and the authority granted to the board. The rules seemed clear-cut, but Jamal sensed that the spirit behind them might be more flexible than the letter suggested. As evening fell, Jamal sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon and casting a warm glow over his garden. He thought about the upcoming challenges and the need to stand firm without alienating his neighbors. This was not just a fight for a garden, but for respect and recognition within a community that often prioritized uniformity over individuality. His phone buzzed, and a message popped up from a nearby neighbor, Emily, who had always admired his garden. "If you need support, I'm here. Many of us love what you've done." Jamal smiled, feeling a sense of solidarity forming even in the face of opposition. The garden had already begun to weave connections, reaching beyond the soil into the hearts of those around him. As night settled in, Jamal prepared for the days ahead, knowing that the path forward would require patience, courage, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. Yet, beneath it all, he remained hopeful that his garden could bloom not just in his yard, but within the community's collective understanding. In the days following Diane Reynolds' stern visit, Jamal Smith found himself caught in a whirlwind of neighborhood whispers and mounting tension. Despite his calm exterior, the pressure weighed heavily on him. He spent hours researching not only the HOA's covenants, but also the history of the land around his property, hoping to find some leverage or clarity that might help in his fight to preserve his garden. One afternoon, as Jamal was tending to a bed of rosemary, the sharp ring of his doorbell interrupted his work. He opened the door to find Diane standing there once again, her expression as rigid as ever. "Mr. Smith," she began without preamble, "the board has reviewed your request for a meeting. However, I must reiterate that the garden must be removed immediately. Continued non-compliance will result in fines and possible legal action." Jamal folded his arms thoughtfully. "Diane, I want to resolve this peacefully. But before I comply, I need to fully understand the parameters. Might I ask if the board is aware that I've recently purchased a significant portion of the HOA's common land adjacent to my property?" Diane blinked, momentarily taken aback. "What are you talking about?" Jamal gestured toward the small parcel of untended land next to his yard. "I quietly acquired this land last month. It's officially recorded under my name now. This changes the dynamic, doesn't it?" Diane's posture stiffened as she processed the information. "That land is considered common property," she said cautiously. "Purchasing it may complicate matters, but it doesn't exempt you from community rules." Jamal nodded, sensing the shift in power, but choosing to remain composed. "I've reviewed the property records extensively. The previous owners failed to renew the HOA's agreement for that parcel, which means I now hold the deed. This land is no longer under the HOA's jurisdiction, but mine." Diane exchanged a quick glance with a woman who had followed her, a fellow board member named Greg. He whispered something to Diane, who then turned back to Jamal, her tone less certain. "This is unexpected," Diane admitted. "We will need to consult with legal counsel." Jamal allowed himself a faint smile. "I anticipated this might surprise you. I am prepared to assert my rights, but I'd prefer if we could negotiate terms that respect both my ownership and the community's interests." Diane nodded curtly and left, leaving Jamal standing at his doorstep with a renewed sense of possibility. The revelation that he owned part of the common land shifted the balance in a way that no one had anticipated. Over the next several days, Jamal continued his preparations. He gathered all relevant documents, deeds, purchase agreements, and HOA covenants and organized them meticulously. He also reached out to a real estate attorney, seeking advice on how to navigate the complex legal landscape. Meanwhile, the neighborhood buzzed with speculation. Some residents whispered that Jamal was overstepping his bounds, while others quietly expressed support for his right to maintain his garden and property. The division was palpable. At a particularly tense HOA board meeting, Jamal requested to speak. The room was filled with familiar faces, neighbors who had once greeted him warmly, but now looked on with suspicion or curiosity. Standing before the assembly, Jamal cleared his throat. "Thank you for allowing me to speak. I understand that my garden and recent land purchase have caused concern. I want to clarify my position and seek a path forward that respects everyone's rights." He paused, scanning the room. "My garden reflects my heritage and my desire to contribute beauty and life to our neighborhood. The land I acquired was common property only because the HOA's agreement had lapsed. With ownership comes responsibility, and I intend to honor that responsibility while also asserting my rights." Diane, seated at the board's head, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Jamal continued, "I'm not here to undermine the community, but to invite a conversation about how we can adapt our rules to better reflect the diversity and values of all residents. Uniformity is important, but so is respect for individual expression and property rights." A murmur rippled through the audience. Some nodded in agreement, while others whispered among themselves. Greg, the board member who had accompanied Diane before, stood. "Mr. Smith, while we appreciate your perspective, the HOA's rules exist to maintain property values and a cohesive neighborhood appearance. Allowing exceptions could lead to chaos." Jamal smiled gently. "I believe order and individuality can coexist. My garden is a testament to that belief." The meeting stretched on, with questions and comments flying back and forth. Some residents voiced support for Jamal, sharing stories of how his garden had brightened their daily walks. Others remained skeptical, wary of change. As the discussion wound down, Diane spoke again, her tone softer but firm. "We will review the situation thoroughly and consult with our legal team. In the meantime, I urge you to consider the community's concerns." Jamal nodded. "I will, and I hope the community will consider mine as well." After the meeting, a few neighbors approached Jamal with tentative smiles and words of encouragement. Emily, who had messaged him earlier, handed him a small pot of young herbs. "For your garden, keep fighting the good fight." Jamal accepted the gift gratefully, feeling the stirrings of a fragile alliance forming. Back at home, Jamal sat at his desk, drafting a detailed letter to the HOA board. He outlined his recent land purchase, his commitment to maintaining the property, and his willingness to collaborate on reasonable guidelines that honored both his rights and the community's interests. He also prepared for the possibility that the board might resist, knowing that legal battles could be imminent. Still, he remained hopeful that dialogue and mutual respect might prevail. As night fell, Jamal stepped outside to his garden, the scent of basil and jasmine filling the air. He looked over the land he now owned, imagining the possibilities not just for himself, but for the neighborhood as a whole. The stakes had clearly changed, and with them, the nature of the conflict. But Jamal felt ready, grounded in his convictions and bolstered by the knowledge that he had taken a decisive step toward protecting what mattered most to him. With the news of Jamal Smith's land purchase now public, the neighborhood found itself at a crossroads. The once quiet subdivision was now a mosaic of divided opinions, with conversations about property rights and personal expression echoing in front yards, community newsletters, and social gatherings. The HOA, facing an unprecedented challenge, scrambled to reassert control, while Jamal prepared to move forward under his new authority. Jamal wasted no time. With the legal counsel's guidance, he began drafting plans for the land adjacent to his property. His vision was clear: to develop the space thoughtfully, incorporating native plants, walking paths, and small communal areas that encourage neighbors to connect with nature and one another. It was a stark contrast to the rigid lawns that lined the rest of the street, but Jamal believed diversity in landscaping could enrich the community rather than diminish it. Word of Jamal's plans spread quickly. Some residents lauded his initiative, viewing it as a refreshing departure from the monotonous uniformity that had long defined the neighborhood. They appreciated the ecological benefits, the invitation to gather in green spaces, and the personal touch that reflected a more inclusive community spirit. "I think what Jamal is doing is inspiring," said Linda, a retiree who had lived nearby for over 20 years. "His garden brightens the street, and now this new space could bring us all together. It's about time we embraced different ideas." Others, however, were less enthusiastic. Concerns about property values, neighborhood aesthetics, and the potential for future rule-breaking simmered beneath polite conversations. Some feared that allowing Jamal's garden and land development might set a precedent that would undermine the HOA's authority. At the next monthly HOA meeting, the atmosphere was charged. The community hall was packed, residents occupying every seat and standing along the walls. Diane Reynolds, still firmly in her role as board president, opened the meeting with a call for order, but the tension was palpable. Jamal was invited to speak early in the session. Standing at the podium, he addressed the crowd with measured confidence. "Thank you all for coming. I understand that recent events have sparked a lot of debate and concern. I want to emphasize that my intention is not to disrupt our community, but to contribute positively to it. My garden and the land I now own represent a chance to create spaces that celebrate diversity and foster connection." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The common land I purchased was neglected for years. I see an opportunity to nurture it into a place where neighbors can gather, children can explore, and pollinators can thrive. This is about respect for the environment and for each other." A few hands went up. One resident, Mr. Thompson, voiced a common concern. "But what about our property values? Won't this open the door to chaos with everyone doing whatever they want?" Jamal nodded thoughtfully. "I've considered that deeply. I believe that well-maintained, thoughtfully designed green spaces can enhance property values. Uniformity doesn't guarantee appeal vibrancy, and care do." Another neighbor, Maria, spoke up with a contrasting view. "I appreciate Jamal's passion, but what about our community agreements? If rules can be bent for one person, where does it stop?" Diane took the floor again. "The HOA is committed to enforcing the covenants that protect our neighborhood. While we respect Mr. Smith's rights, we must ensure that changes do not undermine our collective interests." Jamal responded calmly. "I'm open to working with the board to develop guidelines that balance individual expression with community standards. It's not about disregarding rules, but about evolving them to reflect our community's diversity." The discussion grew more animated, with residents weighing in from both sides. Some shared stories of how Jamal's garden had brought beauty and joy to their walks. Others expressed fears about losing control over the neighborhood's appearance. Throughout the meeting, Jamal maintained a respectful tone, listening carefully and addressing concerns directly. His demeanor seemed to resonate with many who had initially been skeptical. As the meeting drew to a close, Diane announced that the board would form a committee to explore potential revisions to the landscaping guidelines, inviting Jamal to participate. The gesture, though cautious, was a sign of willingness to engage in dialogue. In the following weeks, Jamal found himself in conversations with neighbors he had barely known before. Emily, who had supported his garden from the start, helped organize small gatherings to discuss community values and visions for the neighborhood's future. These informal meetings fostered understanding and slowly bridged divides. Despite pockets of resistance, a noticeable shift was occurring. More residents began to see Jamal not as a disruptor, but as a catalyst for positive change. His garden and plans for the land became symbols of resilience and the possibility of coexistence between tradition and innovation. One afternoon, as Jamal walked through his garden, Linda approached him with a warm smile. "You've started something important here. It's more than just plant sits about respect and openness." Jamal nodded, feeling a sense of quiet accomplishment. "I hope so. It's about creating a space where everyone feels seen and valued." As the neighborhood began to adjust, the HOA's stance softened. Diane, though still cautious, acknowledged that the community's perspectives were evolving. The board's willingness to revisit guidelines and incorporate resident input marked a new chapter in the neighborhood's story. Jamal reflected on the journey so far. The conflict, the debates, and the challenges had tested his resolve, but they had also opened doors to dialogue and change. His garden, once a solitary statement, was becoming a shared experience, a living testament to the power of standing firm with respect and dignity. In quiet moments, Jamal would gaze over the garden and the land beyond, imagining the possibilities ahead. The path was far from easy, but the neighborhood was beginning to embrace a future where diversity and community could thrive side by side. The atmosphere in the neighborhood had transformed significantly since Jamal Smith first planted his garden. Where tension and division once simmered, a new spirit of cooperation and inclusivity was beginning to take root. The HOA board, once rigid and unyielding under Diane Reynolds' leadership, had undergone a shift that reflected the evolving values of the community. At the next annual HOA meeting, the room was noticeably different. The usual air of formality had softened, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Diane Reynolds, after months of negotiations and community pressure, announced her decision to step down from the board. Her departure marked the end of an era of strict enforcement and the beginning of a more open and flexible approach to neighborhood governance. Jamal sat quietly near the back, observing as new faces took their places on the board. Among them was Andrea Preston, a younger resident with a background in urban planning and a reputation for collaborative leadership. She had quickly gained the community's trust by advocating for policies that balanced respect for individual property rights with shared responsibilities. During the meeting, Andrea spoke eloquently about the need to revise the landscaping guidelines to reflect the neighborhood's diversity and values. "Our community thrives when we honor both our collective standards and the unique expressions of each resident," she said. The revised agreement will include clear maintenance, responsibilities, and guidelines that encourage creativity within respectful boundaries. The board unanimously approved the new landscaping guidelines, which allowed for greater flexibility in front yard designs while maintaining overall neighborhood harmony. Jamal's garden, once a point of contention, was cited as an example of how personal expression could enhance the community's character. Following the meeting, Jamal was approached by several residents, offering apologies for their earlier resistance and expressing a desire to support his vision. Some volunteered to help maintain the communal green spaces he had developed on the land he purchased. The gesture was both humbling and encouraging. One afternoon, Jamal met with Andrea in the newly created community garden. a space that had blossomed from the once neglected common land. They discussed plans to organize workshops on sustainable gardening and neighborhood beautification projects to foster further engagement. "It's inspiring to see how far we've come," Andrea said, her eyes reflecting the vibrant colors of blooming flowers around them. "Your perseverance and willingness to engage with the community made all the difference." Jamal smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't easy, but standing firm on what mattered was worth it. More importantly, it showed that respect and understanding can transform conflict into collaboration. As the weeks passed, the neighborhood began to change visibly. Front yards that had once conformed rigidly to uniform standards now showcased a variety of plants and designs, each reflecting the personality and heritage of their owners. The communal green spaces became gathering spots for families, gardeners, and neighbors seeking connection. Jamal often found himself walking through the neighborhood, greeted warmly by residents who now saw him not as a challenger, but as a steward of the land and community spirit. The garden that had sparked controversy had become a symbol of resilience, unity, and the power of standing up for one's rights while fostering goodwill. One quiet evening, Jamal stood by the edge of his garden, the scent of jasmine and rosemary mingling in the air. He reflected on the journey from the initial confrontation with Diane Reynolds to the collaborative community that had emerged. He thought about the lessons learned, that change often begins with quiet determination, that respect is earned through empathy and dialogue, and that challenging the status quo, though difficult, can lead to positive transformation. The neighborhood, once divided by rigid rules and fear of difference, had embraced a future where diversity was celebrated and shared spaces were cared for collectively. Jamal's garden, with its vibrant blooms and thriving pollinators, stood as a testament to the enduring power of hope, courage, and community. If you love the story, like the video and subscribe.